Margaret Sullivan never expected to be pregnant at 58. Abandoned by her husband of 30 years, she stood alone on the overgrown path leading to her childhood home. The Victorian farmhouse, once filled with laughter, now sagged under decades of neglect. Cobwebs hung from the chandelier like ancient lace, and forgotten treasures lay buried under mountains of junk. Her siblings had written off this inheritance as worthless, but Margaret had nowhere else to go. As she pushed open the warped front, dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight, illuminating a familiar hallway. She had come to salvage whatever remained, but what waited in the attic would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family. What dark secrets had her parents taken to their graves? The floorboards creaked under Margaret's cautious steps as she ventured deeper into the house, her hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. At 58, pregnancy felt both miraculous and terrifying. Just 6 months ago, she had been Margaret Sullivan, respected senior editor at Beacon Publishing, with a spacious Manhattan apartment and what she thought was a solid marriage. Then came the two shocks that shattered her world. First, the discovery that a long-forgotten round of IVF from 15 years ago had somehow, against all medical probability, resulted in pregnancy. Second, Richard's confession that he'd been having an affair with his 29-year-old research assistant and wanted a divorce. "I can't be a father at 60, he'd said, as if she'd planned this upheaval. "And let's be realistic, Maggie. You can't be a mother at your age." Margaret pulled a sheet off what proved to be her mother's favorite wingback chair, sending dust motes spiraling through the afternoon light. She lowered herself carefully into it, feeling every one of her 58 years. The third shock had come after Richard left. The discovery of his secret debt, nearly $500,000 that had forced the sale of their apartment. Richard had gambled away their retirement, their security, their future. When the creditors were done, Margaret had exactly $23,642 to her name and nowhere to live. Then came the letter about her parents' house. Both gone now. Her father from a heart attack 5 years ago, her mother from cancer just 6 months later. The property had been in probate, with neither her brother James nor her sister Catherine wanting that old junk heap, as Catherine had called it. Margaret hadn't wanted it either, until she had no choice. She rose slowly and wandered into what had been the formal dining room. A massive oak table stood buried under boxes and stacks of newspapers. Her mother had always been a collector. Not a hoarder, Margaret, there's a difference. But after father died, it had apparently become something else entirely. Pushing aside a stack of yellowed McCall's magazines, Margaret spotted the edge of a gilded frame. She carefully extracted it, wiping away decades of dust with her sleeve, a family portrait from what must have been 1972. Margaret recognized herself, a solemn 10-year-old with dark braids and serious eyes. James, at 15, already showing the stern set to his jaw that would define him as an adult. Catherine, barely 7, golden-haired and smiling. Their parents stood behind them, mother in a high-necked blue dress, father in his Sunday suit. But something about the portrait tugged at Margaret's memory. The composition felt unbalanced, as if she gasped, nearly dropping the frame. The edge of the portrait showed a small hand, just visible at the border. Someone had been cropped from the family picture, someone she couldn't remember. Margaret set the portrait on the table with trembling hands. Her pregnancy-addled brain must be playing tricks. They had always been 5, mother, father, James, Catherine, and herself. There had never been anyone else. And yet, that night, she made up her old bedroom with fresh linens she'd brought. The floral wallpaper was faded but intact. Her teenage bookshelf still lined with dog-eared copies of Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice. The single bed felt narrow after decades of a king-sized mattress, but Margaret found herself sinking into a deeper sleep than she'd had in months. She dreamed of childish laughter echoing through the house, of a small hand holding hers, of a face just beyond her vision that she couldn't quite catch. In her dream, a little voice called her name over and over. "Margaret, Margaret, remember me, Margaret." She woke with tears on her cheeks and the baby kicking insistently, as if trying to communicate something urgent that Margaret couldn't yet understand. Morning light streamed through the dusty windows as Margaret made herself a cup of tea in the cluttered kitchen. She had managed to clear enough counter space to set up a small electric kettle, her one concession to modern convenience in this time capsule of a house. A knock at the back door startled her. Through the grime-covered window, she could make out an elderly man in overalls, a straw hat in his weathered hands. "Miss Margaret? That you in there?" The voice was familiar, though aged by decades. She opened the door cautiously. "Yes? Don't suppose you remember me? Sam Calloway. Used to help your daddy with the grounds." He gestured at the overgrown garden. "Been keeping an eye on the place since your mama passed." Margaret's tension eased as childhood memories surfaced. "Mr. Calloway, of course. You used to sneak me peppermint candies when Mother wasn't looking." His weathered face creased in a smile. "Got a good memory, Miss Margaret. Heard you was back and thought I'd check in, especially in your—" His eyes flicked briefly to her protruding belly, then away, politeness overcoming curiosity. "Yes, well, life is full of surprises," Margaret said dryly. "Would you like some tea?" Over steaming mugs, Sam explained how he'd kept trespassers away and managed minimal maintenance. "Your brother sent money twice a year. Not enough for repairs, mind you, but enough to keep the worst from happening." After he left, promising to return with his riding mower, Margaret tackled her mother's study. Unlike the rest of the house, this room had a semblance of order. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound classics, her mother's antique desk positioned to catch the eastern light. On the desk sat a leather-bound journal. "Gardens and Gatherings" was embossed on the cover. Margaret recognized her mother's gardening journal, a record of plantings and harvests that Eleanor Sullivan had kept religiously for decades. Opening it, she found meticulous notes on planting schedules and weather patterns, interspersed with more personal observations. Roses thriving after spring pruning. Margaret started kindergarten today, cried at the bus but came home full of stories. First frost earlier than expected, lost the late tomatoes. James won his debate tournament, so proud of our boy. Margaret flipped through the years, surprised by how her mother had woven family milestones among the gardening notes. Then entries from 1972 caught her attention. Tulip bulbs planted along east fence. The doctors say Emma's condition isn't improving. Consultation with specialist in Boston next month. "Emma?" Margaret frowned, turning pages more quickly. Daffodils emerging. Emma had another episode. "The neighbors are starting to talk. Richard says we must consider all options." Rose garden devastated by beetle infestation. Emma left for Pinehaven today. The house feels empty. Margaret keeps asking questions we can't answer. Margaret's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the journal. Emma, a name that stirred something deep in her memory, yet remained frustratingly out of reach. Was Emma the figure cropped from the portrait? But who was she? A sister, Margaret, couldn't remember. The entry that truly chilled her came several months later. Fall clean-up completed. East wing sealed off as planned. Told the children Emma went to live with Aunt Judith. Catherine too young to remember much. James understands the necessity. Margaret still asks about her. The collection remains secure. Margaret closed the journal, her heart pounding. The east wing. She hadn't even tried those doors yet, assuming they led to more junk-filled rooms. And what collection was her mother referring to? Her phone rang, startling her. Dr. Chen, her high-risk pregnancy specialist, calling to confirm tomorrow's appointment. "How are you feeling, Margaret?" the doctor asked, her voice warm with professional concern. "Physically fine," Margaret replied, eyes still fixed on the journal. but I think I've discovered a family secret that's rather shaken me. Stress isn't good for you or the baby, Dr. Chen cautioned. Perhaps focus on settling in for now. But as Margaret hung up, she knew she couldn't stop. Not when she was finally beginning to uncover the truth, hidden beneath decades of silence. The appointment with Dr. Chen went as expected, careful monitoring, gentle warnings about geriatric pregnancy risks, and a sonogram that showed a healthy baby girl. Margaret clutched the grainy image as she drove back to the house. This physical evidence of new life, a stark contrast to the mysteries of the past awaiting her. Her phone rang as she pulled into the driveway. James. Maggie, you're being completely irresponsible, her brother said without preamble. Living alone in that decrepit house in your condition. Hello to you too, James, Margaret interrupted, sliding from the car with effort. At 6 months pregnant, her center of gravity had shifted dramatically. I'm fine. The baby's fine. This pregnancy is madness at your age. And now you're nesting in a tetanus factory. Catherine and I have discussed it. Oh, you and Catherine have discussed it? How thoughtful of you to include me in decisions about my life. Margaret fumbled with her keys, the phone wedged between ear and shoulder. Be reasonable, James continued, his corporate lawyer voice in full effect. Sell the house. The land alone is worth something. Move in with Catherine until the baby comes. Then we can discuss adoption options. Margaret felt a surge of protective fury. There will be no adoption options, James. This child is mine. And for your information, I'm making this house a home again. She hung up before he could respond and waddled into the house, anger giving her renewed energy. Her brother and sister had always been unified against her, the rule followers versus the dreamer. They had inherited their father's practicality, while she had inherited, her mother's sentimentality, or something from this mysterious Emma. Determined to make progress, Margaret tackled her father's study next. Unlike her mother's orderly space, this room was a fortress of filing cabinets and stacked banker's boxes. Richard Sullivan had been a meticulous record keeper in his accounting practice, a habit that extended to his personal affairs. In the center stood his massive oak desk, drawers locked. Margaret remembered never being allowed near it as a child. Important papers, Margaret. Not for little fingers. She searched the cluttered bookshelves for a key, without success, finally returning with a kitchen knife to jimmy the locks. The wood was swollen with age and humidity, requiring considerable force. When the main drawer finally popped open, Margaret nearly fell backward. Inside lay neatly labeled folders, taxes, insurance, investments. But it was a plain manila folder labeled Pinehaven that caught her attention. Inside were years of financial statements showing monthly payments to Pinehaven Institute, continuing, long after the gardening journal entry about Emma's departure. The amounts were substantial, enough to explain why family vacations had been rare and Christmas gifts modest despite her father's successful practice. More disturbing were copies of cancelled checks to something called Burlington Trust that began in 1980 and continued until her father's death. A note paper clipped to these read simply, "Continued care as agreed." Monthly transfers automatic. Margaret sat heavily in her father's chair, mind racing. They had maintained financial support for Emma for decades, yet erased her from family photos and memory. Why a sound from upstairs made her freeze. A thump, then the creak of floorboards. Was someone in the house? Heart pounding, Margaret crept up the stairs, her father's heavy metal flashlight clutched in her hand. The sound had come from the direction of the east wing, the sealed section mentioned in her mother's journal. At the end of the main hallway stood double doors painted the same cream color as the walls, nearly invisible if you weren't looking for them. No obvious locks, just a simple latch. As Margaret approached, the sound came again, a distinct thud followed by creaking. Wind through a broken window, she told herself, or a raccoon that had found its way in, yet her hand trembled as she reached for the latch. Something within her, instinct, memory, or perhaps her unborn daughter, warned that opening these doors would irrevocably change everything. Margaret took a deep breath and pushed the latch down. The doors swung open with surprising ease, no resistance from hinges that should have been frozen with disuse. Margaret blinked, momentarily disoriented. She had expected more clutter, more decay. Instead, she found herself staring into a perfectly preserved hallway. While the rest of the house had succumbed to hoarding and neglect, this wing appeared suspended in time. Wallpaper featuring delicate blue flowers-lined walls, unmarred by water stains or cracks. The hardwood floors gleamed as if recently polished. No dust, no cobwebs, just pristine preservation. "Impossible," Margaret whispered, stepping across the threshold. The air felt different here, not musty like the rest of the house, but faintly scented with something familiar she couldn't place. Margaret moved slowly down the hallway, flashlight beam revealing 4 closed doors. The first opened to a bathroom, small but immaculate, with pink tiles and fixtures fashionable in the early 1970s. A child-sized toothbrush sat in a cup by the sink, a faded tube of Crest beside it. The second door led to what appeared to be a small classroom, a wooden desk and chair sized for a child. Bookshelves lined with primers and picture books. An easel in the corner held a watercolor painting of a garden scene, clearly done by a child, but showing unusual attention to detail. Margaret's heartbeat quickened as she approached the third door. Her hand hesitated on the knob as a memory surfaced. Herself as a young girl, standing in this very spot, listening to muffled crying from the other side. The door swung open to reveal a bedroom. A canopied twin bed with a pink coverlet, white dresser with delicate crystal knobs, a bookshelf filled with children's classics, a rocking chair by the window, and toys, carefully arranged dolls on shelves, a dollhouse replica of their very home, stuffed animals positioned as if waiting for their owner's return. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph, the original, unaltered version of the portrait Margaret had found downstairs. In this one, a small girl with dark braids like Margaret's own stood between her and Catherine. The girl's face showed distinctive features, slightly upturned eyes, a broader nose bridge, a wide smile revealing uneven teeth. Margaret sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Down syndrome. The girl, Emma, had Down syndrome. A flash of memory, Emma laughing as they played hide-and-seek. Emma crying when neighborhood children had been cruel. Emma holding Margaret's hand on the first day of school, not understanding why she couldn't come too. How could I forget her? Margaret whispered, touching the photograph with trembling fingers. My own sister. The final door in the hallway opened to reveal a small sitting room. Adult-sized furniture here, a comfortable armchair, a desk, bookshelves filled with medical texts and child development volumes. This must have been where her parents spent time with Emma, separate from the main household. On the desk sat a leather-bound book, Emma's Progress, embossed on the cover. Margaret opened it to find detailed notes in her mother's handwriting, developmental milestones, medical appointments, educational assessments. The entries were meticulously dated and maintained, showing a level of dedication that contradicted the apparent abandonment. The final entry read, Emma transferred to Pine Haven today. Dr. Whitaker assures us they'll continue her educational program and provide the specialized care she needs. Richard says this is for the best, that keeping her home was holding back her development and affecting the other children. My heart is broken, but what choice do we have? The neighbors' complaints to the school board were the final straw. I've prepared her room exactly as she likes it for her visits home, but there were no further entries, no record of visits, just blank pages. Margaret moved to the window and pulled back heavy drapes. Beyond lay an overgrown garden that must once have been beautiful. She could make out the skeletons of rose bushes and the crumbling remains of a stone pathway. A wave of dizziness suddenly overcame her. Black spots danced in her vision as 50 years of suppressed memories fought to surface. Margaret clutched at the windowsill, gasping as pain shot through her abdomen. Emma, she whispered as darkness claimed her. I'm sorry I forgot you. Margaret awoke to the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of hospital. A familiar face swam into focus, Dr. Chen, brow furrowed in concern. "Welcome back," the doctor said, checking readings on the machines. "You gave us quite a scare. The baby," Margaret's hand flew to her belly, "is fine for now." Dr. Chen's tone held gentle warning. "But you experienced what we call a threatened miscarriage. Mr. Calloway found you unconscious and called 911. You're lucky he decided to check on you when he did." Memory flooded back. The sealed wing, Emma's room, the photograph. "I need to get back to the house." "What you need is rest," Dr. Chen countered. "You're staying for observation tonight, and we'll reassess tomorrow. This pregnancy is high risk enough without adding collapses and emotional shocks. You don't understand." "I found—" Margaret stopped. How could she explain discovering a sister she'd somehow forgotten for nearly 50 years? The door opened, and James strode in, his corporate swagger barely concealing anxiety. "Maggie, for God's sake, I told you that house was dangerous." "James!" She hadn't expected him to come. Boston to Connecticut was a 3-hour drive. "Catherine's parking the car," he said, answering her unspoken question. "What happened?" Margaret hesitated. "I found something in the East Wing." James stiffened, his expression shifting from concern to wariness. "The East Wing was sealed decades ago. Structural issues." "No, it's perfectly preserved." "Emma's room—" "I'm getting the doctor," James interrupted, turning away. "James!" Margaret's voice stopped him. "Who was Emma?" Her brother's shoulders slumped. He suddenly looked every one of his 63 years. "You shouldn't be getting upset in your condition." "I'm already upset. I found her photograph, her room. She had Down syndrome. She was our sister, wasn't she?" James sank heavily into the bedside chair. "You really don't remember?" "I have flashes, nothing coherent," he rubbed his face. "You were 10 when she left. Old enough to remember, but children are resilient. They adapt. Forget my own sister." Margaret's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. "How?" "You were devastated when she went away. Cried for weeks. Kept asking when she was coming home. Mother and father decided—" He paused. "They decided a clean break would be easier. Told you she'd gone to live with Aunt Judith. Eventually you stopped asking. But why send her away at all? She had a beautiful room, a classroom. It was a different time, Maggie. The doctor recommended institutionalization. Said she'd get better care, specialized attention. The neighbors had started complaining about her outbursts. The school board refused to accommodate her. Father worried about his professional reputation, so they erased her." Margaret felt sick. "Sealed off her wing like she'd never existed." "They visited her," James said defensively. "Monthly at first, but we didn't. Her own siblings." James looked away. "I went once. Catherine never did." Dr. Chen returned before Margaret could respond. "Your blood pressure's elevated," she said, checking the monitor. "Your brother needs to leave if he's upsetting you." "I'm fine," Margaret insisted, though she felt anything but. "James, I need to know where Emma is now. Is she still at Pinehaven?" Her brother's face told her everything before he spoke. Pinehaven closed in the early 80s. There were investigations, allegations of mistreatment. Horror washed over Margaret. "What happened to Emma?" "I don't know," James admitted. "Father handled everything. Said it was better that way." "Better for whom?" Margaret demanded, the monitors beginning to beep more rapidly. "For Emma, locked away and forgotten. Or for us, pretending she never existed." Dr. Chen stepped between them. "That's enough, Mr. Sullivan, please wait outside." After James left, Dr. Chen adjusted Margaret's IV. "Whatever you found in that house has clearly distressed you. For the baby's sake, you need to stay calm." "I had a sister," Margaret said, tears finally coming. "All these years, and I never knew." "What kind of person forgets their own sister?" "A child who was told to," Dr. Chen said gently. "Now rest. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you home." But as Margaret drifted into sedated sleep, she knew home had taken on an entirely new meaning. She had to find Emma if she was still alive. Had to make right what had been so terribly wrong for half a century. Dr. Chen discharged Margaret the following afternoon with strict instructions for bed, rest and minimal stress, medical directives that seemed laughable given her circumstances. Catherine drove her home, maintaining a tense silence that stretched between them like old elastic, worn thin and ready to snap. You don't have to stay, Margaret said as they pulled into the driveway. I'll be fine, James says otherwise. Catherine's voice held the familiar clipped efficiency that had served her well as a school administrator. He's arranging for a home health aide, but until then, I'm it. Inside, Margaret immediately noticed someone had been cleaning. The kitchen counters were visible, pathways cleared through the living room. Mr. Calloway and his grandson, Catherine explained, following her gaze. They've been working while you were hospitalized. That was kind of them. Margaret eased herself onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Catherine, we need to talk about Emma. Her sister busied herself arranging pillows. You need to rest. Doctor's orders. Did you know about her? Margaret persisted. Do you remember her at all? Catherine sighed, perching on the edge of an armchair. I was 7 when she left. I remember bits, her laugh, the way she'd line up her dolls in perfect rows. Mother brushing her hair while Emma counted the strokes. Yet you never mentioned her. Not once in 50 years. Neither did you, Catherine countered. We all forgot. Or pretended to. It was easier. Not for Emma, Margaret said quietly. Catherine looked away. What do you want from me, Margaret? Guilt? Remorse? It was a different time. Children like Emma weren't integrated into society the way they are now. Our parents made the decisions they thought best, and we just accepted it. Went along with erasing her. We were children. We're not children anymore, Margaret said firmly. I'm going to find her, Catherine. I need to know what happened after Pinehaven closed. Catherine's expression shifted from defensive to concerned. And what about your baby? Is chasing ghosts worth risking your child's life? The question struck hard. Margaret rested her hand on her belly, feeling a reassuring kick in response. This isn't about ghosts. Emma could still be alive. She'd be what, 58 now? The same age as me. She's family. Let James handle it, Catherine pleaded. At least until after the baby comes. James has had decades to handle it. He chose not to. Margaret struggled to her feet. I'm going back to the East Wing. There might be more information there. Catherine followed her upstairs, hovering anxiously. At the entrance to the preserved wing, she hesitated. I haven't been in here since they sealed it up and told us to forget our sister existed. Margaret pushed open the doors. Come see what they did, Catherine. Look at what they tried to erase. They moved through the pristine hallway to Emma's bedroom. Catherine's sharp intake of breath echoed in the stillness as she took in the carefully preserved space. Mother kept it exactly as it was, she whispered, while telling everyone Emma had gone to live with an aunt who didn't exist, Margaret added. She crossed to the bedside table and opened the drawer, finding a small leather-bound book with a tiny lock. The key was still in the lock, as if waiting for someone to discover its contents. Her diary, Margaret said softly, opening to the first page. Childish handwriting filled the lines. My name is Emma Sullivan. I'm 12 years old. Mother says I should write my thoughts because it will help my penmanship. I will try very hard to make good letters. Margaret and Catherine sat side by side on Emma's bed, turning pages slowly. Through simple sentences and occasional drawings, Emma's world came alive. Her daily routines, her frustrations with schoolwork, her love for her family. The final entries grew increasingly troubled. Dr. Whittaker came again. He talks to Mother and Father, not me. They look worried when he leaves. I heard Father say institution today. I don't know this word. Margaret says it's a school far away. The final entry, dated June 15th, 1972, read simply, They say I am going to a special school tomorrow. Mother is crying. I packed my favorite doll. Margaret promised to write letters. I'm scared. Catherine closed the diary gently, tears streaming down her face. I don't remember any of this. How could I forget my own sister? The same way I did, Margaret replied. We were told to, and we did. The ringing phone shattered the silence that had fallen between the sisters. Catherine wiped her eyes and went to answer it, returning moments later. James, she said. He's found a home health aide who can start tomorrow. Margaret nodded absently, still holding Emma's diary. Catherine, do you think Father kept records about Emma after Pinehaven? If he did, they'd be in his study. Catherine hesitated. Maggie, you need to rest. The doctor was very clear. I can rest while going through papers, Margaret countered. I'll sit at his desk. You bring me the files. We're looking for anything related to Pinehaven or Burlington Trust. Catherine looked ready to argue, but instead helped Margaret downstairs to their father's study. As Margaret settled into the leather chair, a memory surfaced, sitting on her father's lap at this very desk while he explained the importance of keeping proper records. "Everything important must be documented, Margaret," he'd said. "That's how we maintain order in a chaotic world." Catherine brought banker's box after banker's box from the storage closet, each labeled with meticulous precision. They found nothing until the sixth box, labeled medical, 1970, 1975. Inside was a thick manila folder. Emma Jean Sullivan, medical history. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were clinical reports, physician consultations, and psychological evaluations spanning Emma's first 12 years. The clinical language was jarring. Patient exhibits typical mongoloid features. Cognitive delays consistent with Down's syndrome diagnosis. Periodic emotional dysregulation. "My God," Catherine whispered, reading over Margaret's shoulder. She saw doctors almost weekly. "They were trying to fix her," Margaret said, fury rising. "Listen to this. Despite intensive speech therapy, patient continues to exhibit significant articulation deficits." She was 12, Catherine. She was just a child with Down syndrome, not a problem to be solved. Deeper in the file, they found correspondence with Dr. Whitaker, the specialist who had recommended institutionalization. His letterhead identified him as director of the Developmental Studies program at Boston University Medical School. "Your daughter's condition requires specialized intervention, beyond what home care can provide," he had written. Pinehaven Institute offers the most advanced therapeutic approach to Mongolism currently available. While not curative, their experimental treatments show promise in reducing symptomatic behaviors and increasing functional capacity. Attached was a brochure for Pinehaven, featuring photos of smiling children engaged in various activities, modern facilities, and uniformed staff. "Advancing the frontier of developmental therapy," the tagline proclaimed. "Experimental treatments," Margaret repeated, a chill running through her. What exactly were they doing to these children? The final document in the folder, dated 6 months after Emma's transfer to Pinehaven, was a medical report that made Margaret's blood run cold. It detailed electroconvulsive therapy sessions, aversion conditioning, and experimental hormone treatments, all conducted on Emma. Catherine gasped. "They were experimenting on her? With our parents' consent?" Margaret said, pointing to Richard Sullivan's signature on the authorization forms. "They must not have understood," Catherine said defensively. "Medical information wasn't as accessible then. If doctors recommended something, they should have asked more questions," Margaret snapped. "They should have protected her." They continued searching, finding additional files documenting the years at Pinehaven. Quarterly progress reports showed little improvement despite the therapies. Notes from their father indicated growing concerns about Emma's condition rather than the promised advances. Letter dated January 1980 marked a turning point. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, we regret to inform you that Pinehaven Institute will cease operations effective March 1st, 1980, following recent regulatory investigations. Arrangements for patient transfers are outlined in the enclosed documentation. This explains the transition to Burlington Trust," Margaret said. "But there's nothing here about where they sent her." "Maybe we should call it a day," Catherine suggested gently. "You look exhausted," Margaret shook her head stubbornly. One more box, but before Catherine could retrieve it, the doorbell rang. Through the window, Margaret saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway. "That can't be the health aide already," Catherine said. Moving toward the door, Margaret remained in the study, staring at Emma's file, wondering what other painful secrets remained to be discovered, and whether finding Emma now, after all this time, would bring healing or only more heartbreak. Catherine returned with a woman in her 30s who introduced herself as Meredith Dawson, the home health aide James had arranged. "You're early," Margaret observed. Hastily closing Emma's file, Mr. Sullivan emphasized the urgency, Meredith replied, her clinical gaze already assessing Margaret. He mentioned you've been ignoring medical advice. Margaret exchanged a look with Catherine. James was attempting to manage her from afar. Typical. I'm reviewing family documents. Hardly strenuous. Nevertheless, Meredith said, your brother has briefed me on your condition. High-risk pregnancy at your age requires strict adherence to medical protocols. Margaret bristled, but recognized the battle wasn't worth fighting. I'll cooperate, but I have a project that can't wait. We'll see, Meredith replied non-committally. First, I need to check your vitals and get you settled properly. While Meredith unpacked equipment and Catherine prepared the guest bedroom for the aide, Margaret quickly photographed key documents from Emma's file with her phone. Something told her access might soon be restricted. The rest of the day passed in a blur of medical assessments, meal preparation, and Meredith's efficient reorganization of the house to accommodate Margaret's condition. By evening, Margaret found herself installed in her bedroom with strict instructions to rest. Meredith in the room across the hall, keeping watchful ears open. This is ridiculous, Margaret whispered to Catherine when she came to say goodnight. I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. You collapsed 2 days ago, Catherine reminded her. Just humor her for now. James is paying a fortune. Speaking of James, Margaret said, lowering her voice further, did you notice he never answered when I asked where Emma went after Pinehaven? Catherine hesitated. You think he knows? I think he knows more than he's telling us. Look at this. Margaret showed Catherine her phone, scrolling through the documents she'd photographed. These bank statements from 1980 show large withdrawals when Pinehaven closed, almost $50,000. That was a fortune then. Maybe it was for Emma's continued care, Catherine suggested, without documentation. That wasn't like father. Margaret pulled up another image. And look at these transfers to Burlington Trust beginning right after Pinehaven closed, regular payments for years. But nowhere does it say what Burlington Trust is or where Emma was sent. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, concern etched on her face. What do you think happened? I don't know, but I intend to find out. Margaret retrieved her laptop from the nightstand. Let's see what the internet knows about Burlington Trust. The search yielded little, no website, minimal public records. Just a P.O. box in Boston and registration as a private trust established in 1979. Dead end. Catherine sighed. Not necessarily. Margaret typed Pinehaven Institute scandal and hit enter. Results flooded the screen. Newspaper archives, academic papers on healthcare ethics, and blog posts by former patients. They read in horrified silence about the investigations that closed Pinehaven, allegations of abuse, experimental treatments without proper oversight, and several patient deaths. My God, Catherine whispered. And our parents sent Emma there. They believed the doctors, Margaret said. Though the justification felt hollow even to her, a link to patient relocation records, the aftermath of institutional closures in Massachusetts, caught Margaret's attention. The academic paper required a subscription, but the abstract mentioned Burlington Trust as one of several entities that accepted transfers from closed facilities. Burlington Trust wasn't a place, Margaret realized. It was a financial arrangement to fund ongoing care for transferred patients. But transferred where? Catherine asked. Margaret scrolled through more search results, finding mention of class action lawsuits against several institutions, including Pinehaven. Court documents listed Burlington Trust as the financial guardian for multiple former Pinehaven residents relocated to various facilities. We need those court records, Margaret said. They might show where Emma was sent. Catherine checked her watch. It's nearly 11. You need to sleep. How can I sleep knowing you can't help Emma if you lose this baby? Catherine said firmly. Rest tonight. Tomorrow I'll go to the county records office. These would have been public proceedings. Margaret reluctantly agreed, though sleep seemed impossible with her mind racing through possibilities. Where was Emma now? Was she still alive? And if she was, what would she think of the sister who had forgotten her for 50 years? As Catherine left, Margaret noticed a folded paper that had slipped from the Emma file onto the floor. She retrieved it, a bank statement showing the initial deposit establishing the Burlington Trust account. The memo line contained a single word: Greenfield. Greenfield, Margaret whispered to herself, turning the word over in her mind like a smooth stone. Morning light filtered through the curtains as she lay in bed, Meredith's footsteps already audible downstairs. Sleep had come in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with fragmented memories of Emma. She reached for her phone, careful not to make noise that would summon her watchful health aide. A quick search revealed Greenfield was a small city in western Massachusetts, about 2 hours away. Could this be where Emma had been transferred? The bedroom door opened, and Meredith entered with a breakfast tray and medication. Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Fine," Margaret lied, tucking her phone under the covers. "Your sister called. She's on her way to the county records office as planned. She'll be back this afternoon." Meredith's tone made it clear she disapproved of this research project. "Dr. Chen's office confirmed your appointment for tomorrow. I'll drive you." "Thank you." Margaret accepted the tray, mind still on Greenfield. "Meredith, would you bring me my laptop? I'd like to catch up on some reading." The aide hesitated but relented, returning moments later with the computer. 1 hour, then rest, doctor's orders. Once alone, Margaret searched for care facilities in Greenfield. The list was manageable: 2 nursing homes, an assisted living center, and a place called Sunnybrook Residential Center for Developmental Disabilities. The latter immediately caught her attention. Its website described it as serving adults with developmental disabilities since 1977, and mentioned accepting transfers from several closed institutions in 1980, including Pine Haven. Her heart racing, Margaret clicked through to the About Us page, finding photos of the facility, a cluster of cottage-style buildings on spacious, tree-lined grounds. It looked nothing like the clinical Pine Haven brochure, more like a small campus than an institution. A soft knock interrupted her research. Mr. Calloway stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Margaret, hope I'm not disturbing you. Just finished up some yard work and thought I'd check in." "Please, come in," Margaret said, grateful for the friendly face. "And thank you for all you've done around the house. Least I could do." He perched awkwardly on a chair. "Been thinking about what you asked, about your sister Emma." Margaret's breath caught. "You remember her?" "Course I do. Sweet child. Always wanted to help me in the garden. Had a special way with plants, she did." His weathered face creased in a smile. "Used to sing to them. Said it made them grow better." "Mr. Calloway, do you know what happened to her, where she went?" His smile faded. "They sent her away. Some fancy place up near Greenfield, your father said. Supposed to help her, but—" He shook his head. "Never seemed right to me. Family should stay together." "Greenfield," Margaret repeated. "Sunnybrook, perhaps?" "That sounds familiar. Your mother used to go visit once a month, regular as clockwork. Brought back pictures sometimes. Emma in a garden. Emma at some kind of dance." He twisted his hat in his hands. "Stopped going sometime in the mid-80s. Your father kept up the visits a while longer, I think. But they never brought her home." "No, ma'am. Said it was better for everyone this way." Mr. Calloway's eyes held a mixture of sadness and disapproval. "Never did understand that. Miss Emma brought life to this place." After he left, Margaret returned to her computer with renewed purpose. Sunnybrook had a contact page with an email address and phone number. Her finger hovered over the call button, but doubt crept in. What would she say? How would she explain forgetting her own sister for 5 decades? A notification popped up on her phone. Catherine had sent a text. "Found something. Court documents confirm Emma went to Sunnybrook in 1980. Burlington Trust, set up by Dad to fund lifetime care. On my way back." Margaret stared at the message, emotions churning. They had found Emma, or at least found where she had been sent. But was she still there? Still alive? A brochure image on Sunnybrook's website caught her eye. A smiling older woman with Down syndrome working in a garden, her silver-streaked dark hair in a neat bun. The caption read, "Our residents find fulfillment through our therapeutic horticulture program." Margaret's heart stopped. The woman's features, though aged, were unmistakable. "Emma," she whispered, touching the screen, "it's you." When Catherine arrived that afternoon, she found Margaret already dressed and packing an overnight bag. "What do you think you're doing?" Catherine demanded, dropping her purse on the bed. "Going to Greenfield," Margaret replied, folding a sweater with determined precision. "I found Emma on Sunnybrook's website. She's still there, Catherine." "Are you insane?" Catherine lowered her voice as Meredith passed by the door. "You're 7 months pregnant with a high-risk pregnancy. You can't just take off on a 2-hour drive? Watch me." Margaret zipped the bag closed. "I've already called Sunnybrook. They confirmed Emma is a resident, though they wouldn't give details over the phone. Privacy regulations." "And how exactly? Do you plan to get past your watchdog out there?" Catherine gestured toward the hallway where Meredith was organizing medications. Margaret sighed, deflating slightly. "I hadn't figured that part out yet." Catherine sat beside her sister, taking her hand. "Listen to me. I want to find Emma too, but we need to be smart about this. One wrong move, and you could lose this baby." Tears of frustration welled in Margaret's eyes. "I can't just sit here knowing she's only 2 hours away. She's been alone for 50 years, Catherine." "Not alone. Cared for." Catherine squeezed Margaret's hand. "The papers I found show father set up Burlington Trust with enough money to support Emma for life at Sunnybrook. He made annual contributions until he died. There are quarterly reports from the facility in the court records. She's had good care." "But no family," Margaret insisted. "No visits, no calls, no cards. Just money sent to strangers." Catherine looked away. "The records show mother visited monthly until 1986. Then the visits became less frequent. Father continued going a few times a year until his stroke in 2017. Margaret stared at her sister, processing this revelation. "So they didn't completely abandon her?" "No, they just—" Catherine struggled for words. "They compartmentalized her, kept her separate from the rest of their lives, from our lives." A heavy silence fell between them. Finally, Catherine spoke again. "I have an idea. What if I go to Greenfield tomorrow? I can meet with the administrators, explain the situation, maybe even see Emma to prepare her for your visit. While I sit here useless, while you rest and follow doctor's orders so that when you do meet Emma, you're not doing it from a hospital bed." Catherine's practical tone softened. "Let me do this for you, Maggie, for all of us." Margaret reluctantly agreed, recognizing the logic in Catherine's plan. "Bring pictures of all of us and tell her—" Her voice broke. "Tell her I never forgot her, not really, that she was always there just beneath the surface." The next morning, after Meredith took Margaret to her doctor's appointment, Catherine set off for Greenfield in her sensible Volvo, armed with family photos and the court documents proving their relationship to Emma. Dr. Chen was pleased with Margaret's progress, but concerned about her blood pressure. "Still elevated. Are you following the rest instructions?" "Mostly," Margaret admitted, avoiding Meredith's disapproving glance. "Mostly isn't good enough at this stage," the doctor warned. "I'm seeing early signs of preeclampsia. If your blood pressure doesn't improve, we may need to consider hospitalization." The threat of hospital confinement was enough to make Margaret promise better compliance. Back home, she spent the afternoon in her father's study, ostensibly resting but actually combing through more files. In the bottom drawer, she found a manila envelope labeled simply ES Photos. Inside were dozens of photographs spanning decades, Emma's progression from child to adult, all taken at Sunnybrook. Emma in a Christmas pageant, Emma receiving an award for her gardening, Emma at her 30th birthday celebration, blowing out candles on a cake, The most recent photos, dated just 3 years ago, showed Emma in her 50s, her dark hair now streaked with silver, but her smile unchanged. In one, she stood proudly, beside a massive pumpkin in what appeared to be a garden competition. Margaret traced her sister's features with a trembling finger. Their parents had maintained this photographic record while keeping Emma's existence a secret from the world, a compartmentalized grief that seemed both cruel and understandable. Her phone rang, Catherine calling from Sunnybrook. Margaret answered with shaking hands, her heart pounding as she awaited news of the sister she had lost and found in the space of a week. "Maggie, she's here. She's alive and well." Catherine's voice trembled with emotion. "I'm looking at her right now." Margaret gripped the phone tighter, sinking into her father's chair.
"How is she?"
"Does she remember us? Did you tell her about me?" "One question at a time," Catherine laughed, a sound tinged with tears. "She's wonderful, Maggie. Different than I expected, but wonderful. She has her own apartment in one of the residential cottages. She works in the garden centre here. They sell plants to the public. She has friends. A life." Margaret closed her eyes, picturing it. "Does she remember?" A pause. "Yes and no. She remembers having a family, but the details are fuzzy. When I showed her our photos, she recognized mother and father immediately, called them by name, and us. She remembered you, Maggie. Called you my Margaret, but she didn't recognize me, not really. I was too young when she left, I guess." Margaret's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her touch. "Does she know I'm coming to see her?" "That's the thing," Catherine said, her voice dropping. "The staff thinks it might be too much at once. Her case manager, Susan, suggested we take it slowly. I'm having lunch with Emma tomorrow. They want to see how that goes before introducing you." Disappointment washed over Margaret, followed by grudging acceptance. After 50 years, what was a few more days? "You'll tell her about me?" "About the baby?" "Actually, I already mentioned you're pregnant." She was thrilled, Maggie. She kept saying she's going to be an aunt. Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. "What else did she say?" "Tell me everything. She's eager to meet you, but Susan cautioned that Emma gets anxious with too much change. They're protective of her here, in a good way. The director showed me her file. She had a difficult transition from Pinehaven, night terrors, regression. Apparently, the treatments there did real damage." Margaret winced, remembering the clinical reports. "But she recovered?" "Over time, yes. Susan says she's one of their success stories. She has moderate independence, knows her medications, manages her own schedule. She's even on the resident council." Pride swelled in Margaret's chest. "Our sister." "There's more," Catherine said. "I found newspaper clippings in the administration office about Emma. She won a regional gardening competition last year. Her pumpkin set a county record." Margaret laughed through her tears. "Mr. Calloway would be proud. She's also an artist, Maggie. They have a gallery of resident artwork, and Emma's paintings they're extraordinary. Primitive style, but with this incredible attention to detail. Mostly gardens and nature scenes. The activities director says painting helps with her periodic anxiety." "I want to see them," Margaret said. "I want to see everything." "Soon," Catherine promised. "I'm staying overnight and meeting with the director again tomorrow. We're discussing how to transition to regular family involvement without disrupting Emma's routine." After they hung up, Margaret sat in her father's study, surrounded by the physical evidence of Emma's fractured connection to their family. Photos, financial statements, medical reports. A paper trail documenting 50 years of absence. She pulled out a yellowed newspaper page her father had saved, dated 1980. The headline read, "State launches investigation into Pinehaven Institute amid abuse allegations." Margaret had skimmed it before, but now she read every word, horror mounting as she absorbed detailed accounts of neglect, experimental therapies without consent, and patient mistreatment. One paragraph stood out. Former staff member Janet Wilkins alleges that residents with families who visited regularly received preferential treatment, while others were subjected to harsher disciplinary measures and untested treatments. Some patients would beg for their parents during procedures, Wilkins stated. The children who had regular visitors were treated better because the staff knew someone was watching. Margaret set the paper down, hands shaking. Emma had been visited monthly, according to the records. Had that saved her from the worst abuses? Or had she suffered during the weeks between visits, begging for her family? The baby kicked sharply as if responding to her distress. Margaret rubbed her belly, whispering, "We'll make it right. We'll bring her home." But as night fell and Meredith checked her blood pressure with a disapproving frown, Margaret wondered if home would be ready in time, and if Emma would even want to come. 3 days passed, filled with Catherine's detailed reports from Sunnybrook and Margaret's growing impatience. The staff had approved a visit, carefully scheduled for the following weekend to give Emma time to prepare. Margaret spent hours planning what to bring: old photos, a few small gifts. Nothing overwhelming. James arrived unannounced Thursday afternoon, his BMW pulling into the driveway, just as Margaret was sorting through a box of childhood memorabilia for items to show Emma. "I hear you've stirred up quite a situation," he said without preamble, settling into the living room chair opposite her. "Hello to you too, James," Margaret replied, setting aside a faded friendship bracelet she'd discovered in her jewelry box, handmade, with M+E woven into the pattern. "Catherine tells me you're planning to visit Emma this weekend." "Yes, and you're here to stop me because—" James sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I'm not here to stop you, Maggie. I'm here because there are things you should know before you go." Something in his tone made Margaret set down the bracelet. "What things?" "I've known where Emma was all along." He held up a hand to forestall her outburst. "Father made me promise to keep an eye on things after his stroke. I've been in regular contact with Sunnybrook's administration. I've been contributing to Burlington Trust annually, above what Father established." Margaret stared at her brother, processing this revelation. "You knew all these years?" "Yes. And you never told us? Never suggested we visit her, acknowledge her existence?" "Father thought it best." "Father thought a lot of things that were wrong," Margaret interrupted, anger flaring. "He thought sending his daughter away and erasing her from our family history was best too." James's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the entire situation." "Then enlighten me." He reached into his briefcase and removed a leather portfolio. "Father left this with me. Said if circumstances ever changed, I should share it with you and Catherine." "What circumstances?" "If Emma's situation changed, or if you or Catherine ever discovered the truth." He passed her the portfolio. "I should have brought this sooner." Inside was a collection of photographs, recent ones, not the historical record Margaret had found. Emma, in her 50s, looking remarkably like Margaret herself, but with the distinctive features of Down syndrome. Emma painting at an easel. Emma tending an impressive garden. Emma with a small group of other residents at what appeared to be a birthday celebration. "I visited her," James admitted. "Twice a year since Father's stroke. I introduced myself as a family friend. She doesn't remember me from childhood." Margaret's hands trembled as she turned to the final photograph, Emma holding a framed picture of their family, her finger pointing directly at Margaret's image. "According to the date stamp, the photo was taken just last year." "She remembers you," James said softly. "Always has. She asks about my Margaret whenever I visit." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years, James, all these years of silence. I was honoring Father's wishes." He looked away. "And protecting you. Protecting me from what? My own sister?" James hesitated. "From the guilt. Father was very clear. You took Emma's institutionalization the hardest. Cried for months. Started having nightmares. The child psychologist said a clean break would be best for your development, so you decided to continue that clean break into my adulthood. My middle age?" Margaret's voice rose. "That wasn't your decision to make." "No, it wasn't," James conceded. "I realize that now. But there's more, Maggie. Something Father never told anyone but me." "What more could there possibly be?" "Emma isn't just your sister." James met her eyes steadily. "She's your twin." Margaret's world tilted. "That's not possible. I would remember you were fraternal twins. You were developing typically, while Emma showed signs of Down syndrome from birth." Back then it was common practice to separate twins if one had developmental issues. Doctors believed it would prevent the normal twin from developing a complex or being held back by their disabled sibling. Margaret stared at the photograph of Emma, seeing the resemblance with new eyes, the shape of their faces, the set of their mouths, twins. The revelation settled over her like a heavy blanket, both suffocating and strangely comforting. Twins, Margaret repeated, the word foreign yet familiar on her tongue. We're twins, yes. James looked relieved to have the truth out. Father said you were inseparable as toddlers. Had your own language, like twins sometimes do. When the doctors recommended institutionalization, you became inconsolable. Wouldn't eat, couldn't sleep. That's why they decided on the clean break approach. Margaret pressed a hand to her temple, fragmented memories suddenly shifting into focus. A small hand always in hers, a voice echoing her words. A presence so constant she'd never questioned it until it vanished. The psychologist told them, your mind might protect you by suppressing the memories, James continued. Apparently that's what happened. By the time you were 11, you'd stopped asking for Emma entirely. But why the continued deception? When I was an adult? James sighed. By then patterns were established. Emma had settled at Sunnybrook. You seemed adjusted. Father thought disrupting everyone's lives would only cause more pain. That wasn't his choice to make, Margaret said, anger rising again. Or yours? No, James agreed quietly. It wasn't. A tense silence fell between them. Finally, Margaret asked, why tell me now? You could have continued the deception, because I saw your face at the hospital when you mentioned finding Emma's room. I realized Father was wrong. The secret has caused more harm than protection. He hesitated. And because Emma has been asking for you more frequently, something changed last year. She started having dreams about you, saying her twin was coming back. Dreams. About me? According to her case manager. They thought it was just wishful thinking until Catherine showed up. James smiled faintly. Emma apparently told everyone at breakfast that morning that her sister was coming. They thought she meant her usual delusions. Then Catherine arrived. The revelation sent shivers down Margaret's spine. We're still connected somehow, perhaps. James reached into his briefcase again. There's one more thing. Emma is quite an artist. Susan, her case manager, gave me this to give to you. Emma painted it last month. He handed over a carefully wrapped canvas. Margaret unwrapped it with trembling hands to reveal a painting of two women, unmistakably herself and Emma, seated on a garden bench. Between them sat a baby in a white dress. The detail was remarkable. Margaret's pregnancy was clearly visible, yet the baby was also present, as if existing in two time frames simultaneously. How could she know? Margaret whispered, touching the painted baby. She hadn't told anyone about her pregnancy until after Richard left. Even James and Catherine hadn't known until her collapse. I don't know, James admitted. Susan says Emma has always had moments of intuition, I guess you'd call it, especially about you. Margaret's scientific mind rebelled against the implications. Yet the evidence was before her, a painting created weeks before Emma could have known about her pregnancy. There's more, James said. Sunnybrook called me yesterday. They're downsizing, budget cuts. They're closing the residential cottages where Emma lives. Margaret's head snapped up. What? When? 3 months from now. They're finding placements for residents at other facilities. James looked uncomfortable. I've been exploring options. There's a good place in Vermont. No, Margaret said firmly. No more institutions. No more sending her away. She placed a protective hand over her belly. Emma belongs with family. Maggie, be reasonable. Your pregnancy, the house, this house has an entire wing that's been waiting for her for 50 years, Margaret interrupted. It's time she came home. You can't possibly manage care for an adult with Down syndrome while raising a newborn alone at your age, James protested. Watch me, Margaret replied, steel in her voice. Better yet, help me. James stared at his sister, seeing in her expression the same determination their father had shown in his most stubborn moments. You're serious? Completely. I've lost 50 years with my twin. I won't lose another day. Margaret picked up the painting again. Look at this, James. She knew I was coming back for her. She's been waiting. Her brother was silent for a long moment. You'll need help. Professional care, modifications to the house, legal arrangements. Then let's get started, Margaret said, already making mental lists. Emma's coming home. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Margaret's plan to bring Emma home mobilized the entire family in ways she couldn't have imagined. James, once the voice of caution, now channeled his corporate efficiency into practical matters, consulting with disability specialists, arranging for home assessments, and untangling the legal complexities of guardianship. Catherine took leave from her school administration job to help prepare the house, focusing on transforming the East Wing into a suitable living space for Emma. Together, they sorted through decades of hoarded possessions, creating pathways, clearing rooms, and making space for new life amid the remnants of the old. Father's financial records show something interesting, James said one evening as they gathered around the dining table. Now cleared of debris and set for a proper meal. The house isn't just in our names. Emma is listed on the deed as well through Burlington Trust. It's legally partially her house. Margaret smiled at this revelation. She's been here all along in some way. There's more, James continued. Father left a separate fund for house maintenance that none of us knew about. There's enough to cover the renovations we need, plus a lift installation and bathroom modifications. He always planned for her return, Catherine said softly, even if he couldn't bring himself to make it happen. The property deed James had discovered proved to be just the beginning. Further investigation revealed a comprehensive trust arrangement, ensuring Emma would always have care, housing, and financial support. Their father, for all his flaws, had never abandoned his daughter completely, just kept her separate in a compartmentalized version of love. Dr. Chen monitored Margaret's pregnancy with increased vigilance, concerned about her elevated activity levels. Your blood pressure remains higher than I'd like, she warned during a checkup. The preeclampsia risk is real, Margaret. You need to pace yourself, but slowing down felt impossible. Margaret's nesting instinct had expanded beyond preparing for her baby to creating space for her twin. She spent hours in Emma's preserved room, now refreshed with new bedding, but maintaining the familiar elements Sunnybrook staff advised were important for Emma's transition. The visit to Sunnybrook, originally planned as a brief introduction, evolved into a series of carefully structured meetings. Emma's case manager, Susan, worked closely with them to develop a transition plan. Emma has a remarkable ability to adapt, Susan told them during a planning session. But routine and familiarity are essential. The move needs to be gradual, with plenty of preparation. Margaret treasured each visit, each small reconnection with her twin. Emma's initial shy recognition had blossomed into excited anticipation, her face lighting up whenever Margaret appeared. Though her speech was sometimes difficult to understand, her emotions were crystal clear: joy, curiosity, and a deep, abiding love that had somehow survived 50 years of separation. My Margaret, she would say, patting Margaret's growing belly. Baby coming soon. I help. One unexpected visitor arrived a month before Margaret's due date, Richard, appearing on the doorstep with contrition written across his face. I've been an absolute fool, he admitted, standing awkwardly in the foyer, leaving you when you needed me most. I've had a lot of time to think and I... Save it, Margaret interrupted, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting on her prominent belly. I'm not interested in your midlife crisis recovery. Please, Maggie. I was in shock about the baby, about being a father at 60. But I've come around. I want to support you, be there for our child. You left me with nothing, Richard. Walked away after 30 years of marriage and left me to discover you'd gambled away our retirement. I can make it right, he pleaded. I've sold the practice. I can contribute financially, help with the baby we agreed we didn't want 15 years ago. The baby you told me I was too old to have. That baby. Richard looked away. I was wrong. About everything. I'd like a chance to prove I can be better. Margaret studied the man she'd spent half her life with. There was genuine remorse in his expression. But something else too, the dawning realization that he'd miscalculated badly and was now on the outside of something remarkable taking shape without him. "I'm bringing my sister home," Margaret said. "My twin sister who's been institutionalized since we were 12. I'm having a baby. I'm creating a family, Richard. Whether you're part of it is entirely up to you. But understand this, you'll be entering on my terms, not yours." The day of Emma's homecoming arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, golden sunlight, and trees ablaze with color. Margaret stood on the porch watching James's car approach, her heart racing with anticipation. Beside her, Catherine clutched a welcome banner they'd made together, while Meredith, now fully invested in the family drama, waited with a freshly baked apple pie. Emma's favorite according to her Sunnybrook file, Richard hovered uncertainly in the background. He'd spent the past 3 weeks proving his commitment, helping with renovations, attending planning meetings, and gradually earning a tentative place in the reformed family structure. Margaret remained cautious but acknowledged his efforts. The car stopped, and Susan, Emma's case manager, emerged first. She surveyed the welcoming committee with approval before opening the rear door. James appeared next, offering his hand to Emma, who hesitated momentarily before stepping out. Margaret's breath caught. Though they'd visited several times at Sunnybrook, seeing Emma here, at their childhood home, created a strange doubling effect. As if time had folded back on itself, Emma wore a neat blue dress and cardigan, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her eyes, so like Margaret's own, widened as she took in the house, the decorated porch, the faces watching for her reaction. "Home?" she asked Susan, her voice carrying the distinctive tone of Down syndrome, but clear in its uncertainty. "Yes, Emma, this is your home now with your family," Susan confirmed. Emma's gaze found Margaret, and something shifted in her expression, recognition deeper than memory. "My Margaret," she said, moving forward with surprising grace for a woman of 58. They embraced on the walkway, these twins separated for a lifetime, now reunited. Margaret felt the baby kick vigorously between them, as if recognizing this momentous connection. "Baby knows Aunt Emma," Emma said with a delighted laugh. Placing her hand on Margaret's belly, the homecoming procession moved inside, where Emma was shown the renovated East Wing. Her childhood room had been preserved but updated, the adjoining spaces transformed into a comfortable apartment with accommodations for her needs while maintaining her independence. "All mine?" Emma asked, turning in a circle to take in the suite. "All yours," Margaret confirmed. "But you're not separate anymore, Emma. You're part of our family again." Emma nodded solemnly, then opened the suitcase James had carried in. From it, she withdrew a battered stuffed rabbit, its fur worn bare in patches from decades of handling. "My Hoppy," she explained, setting it on the bed. "Margaret gave me." Margaret stared at the toy, another memory surfacing, saving her allowance for weeks to buy matching rabbits, one for herself and one for Emma. "You kept him all this time." "My Margaret coming back someday," Emma said simply. Hoppy waited too. The afternoon unfolded with a careful balance of structure and celebration. Susan had coached them on maintaining elements of Emma's Sunnybrook routine while introducing new family dynamics. Emma proudly showed her artwork, distributed small handmade gifts she'd prepared for everyone, and displayed a surprising memory for childhood details the others had forgotten. "Remember garden? We had sunflowers tall like trees," she told Catherine. "You afraid of bees?" "I showed you bees are friends." Catherine looked startled. "I'd completely forgotten that. You used to talk to the bees, tell them to be gentle." "They listened," Emma said with complete certainty. As evening approached, Susan prepared to leave, having stayed to ensure a smooth transition. "She's doing remarkably well," she told Margaret privately. "Better than I expected. There's a connection here that institutional care could never provide." "Thank you," Margaret said, meaning it more deeply than words could express. "For taking care of her all these years. For helping bring her home." After dinner, they gathered in the living room. where James had set up a projector to show family photos, both the hidden collection from their father's files and recent ones from Sunnybrook. Emma watched with intense concentration as her fractured history was woven back together image by image. "Two Margarets," she said suddenly, pointing at a childhood photo where the twins stood side by side in identical dresses. "Yes," Margaret agreed, her throat tight with emotion. "We were always two parts of the same whole." Emma nodded, satisfied with this explanation. She reached for Margaret's hand just as a sharp pain lanced through Margaret's abdomen, causing her to gasp and double over. "Margaret!" Emma's concerned face was the last thing she saw before another stronger contraction washed over her in a wave of cramping pressure. Too soon. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks. Chaos erupted. Richard called 911 while James helped Margaret to the couch. Catherine ran for towels and Meredith's medical bag, her administrator's efficiency taking over. Emma stood frozen, her eyes wide with distress, until Susan guided her to a chair beside Margaret. "Baby coming now?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm amid the panic. "Too soon," Margaret gasped between contractions. "Not supposed to happen yet." Emma took her hand with firm gentleness. "Baby knows when. Like I knew you'd come." The paramedics arrived quickly, confirming Margaret was in active labor with contractions 3 minutes apart. "Blood pressure's dangerously high," one said to his partner. "Possible preeclampsia. We need to move her now." As they prepared to transport Margaret, Emma became agitated. "I go too." "Stay with Margaret." "Emma, you should stay here," James began, but Margaret cut him off. "She comes." Another contraction gripped her, stealing her breath. When it passed, she added, "She's my twin. I need her." Susan stepped forward. "I'll accompany them." "Emma can handle this if she's properly supported." The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and motion. Emma held Margaret's hand throughout, her presence a strange anchor in the storm. "Breathe with me," she instructed, demonstrating the slow, steady rhythm. "Like we did before." Margaret managed between contractions when we were small. When scared, we breathed together. Emma continued the pattern, and Margaret found herself instinctively matching it, their breath synchronizing as it apparently had half a century earlier. At the hospital, Dr. Chen met them in the emergency entrance. "I knew you'd push yourself too hard," she scolded, but her hands were gentle as she examined Margaret. 8 centimeters dilated. "This baby's coming tonight." Emma refused to leave, even as nurses tried to usher her to the waiting room. "No, stay with my Margaret." Her normally docile demeanor had transformed into something fierce and protective. "Let her stay," Margaret insisted as another contraction peaked. "She's helping." Dr. Chen assessed the unusual situation, nodded once, and instructed a nurse to help Emma into sterile coverings. "She can stay if she remains calm. At the first sign of distress, she's out." But Emma displayed a remarkable composure throughout the increasingly intense labor. She held Margaret's hand, wiped her brow, and continued their synchronous breathing as if they'd rehearsed for this moment their entire lives. "You're her twin?" Dr. Chen asked during a brief lull. "Yes, but away long time. Now home." Emma's simplified explanation contained volumes, her blood pressures stabilizing, a nurse reported with surprise. "Coming down toward normal range." Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose. "Interesting." She glanced between the sisters. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." The next hour blurred into a haze of pain and effort. Richard, James, and Catherine took turns visiting briefly. But it was Emma who remained constant, her steadying presence belying her supposed disability. "Push now," Dr. Chen finally instructed. "Baby's coming." Emma's encouragement never wavered. "Strong, Margaret. Always strong. Push baby out now." With a final monumental effort, Margaret delivered her daughter into Dr. Chen's waiting hands. The baby's indignant cry filled the room, healthy, strong, and perfect, despite her early arrival. "A beautiful girl," Dr. Chen announced, placing the infant on Margaret's chest. "Small but fighting." Emma leaned close, her face illuminated with wonder. "Hello, baby," she whispered. "I'm your Aunt Emma. Been waiting long time for you." The baby's cry softened at Emma's voice. Her tiny hand escaped the blanket and seemed to reach toward the sound. As the medical team bustled around them, Margaret looked between her newborn daughter and her twin sister, these two miracles bookending her life. "Emma," she said, her voice rough with emotion, "would you like to help name her?" Emma's face lit up. "Really, I can name?" "We'll name her together," Margaret clarified. Emma considered this with deep seriousness, then smiled. "Emma Rose," she declared. "Like me, but new." Margaret felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Emma Rose Sullivan. It's perfect." Later, as hospital staff prepared to move mother and baby to a recovery room, a nurse brought the family Bible that Catherine had thought to grab from the house. "Your sister said you'd want this right away." Margaret opened to the family record pages, where births, marriages, and deaths had been meticulously documented for generations. Her father's precise handwriting filled most entries, but there was a glaring omission. Emma's birth wasn't recorded, with Emma watching. Margaret took a pen and carefully wrote in the missing entry, "Emma Jean Sullivan, born April 17, 1967. Below it she added, "Emma Rose Sullivan, born October 15, 2025. Emma traced the names with a gentle finger. "Family," she said with quiet satisfaction. "All together now in the book." 1 year later, Margaret stood in the garden watching Emma guide little Emma Rose's fingers as they patted soil around a newly planted rose bush. The October sunshine bathed them in golden light, autumn leaves creating a colorful carpet around their feet. "Gentle, gentle," Emma instructed her namesake niece, who at 12 months already showed the stubborn determination of her mother. "Plants need tender hands. She's a natural teacher," Catherine observed, joining Margaret on the stone patio they'd added over the summer. "Who would have thought?" "I would," Margaret replied. "She's always had that gift. We just never got to see it." The past year had brought transformations Margaret could never have imagined when she'd first returned to her childhood home, pregnant and alone. The house itself had evolved from a neglected repository of hoarded memories to a vibrant family home. The East Wing, once a shrine to Emma's absence, now served as her apartment, complete with an art studio, where she created paintings that had recently caught the attention of a gallery specializing in outsider art. The sound of hammering came from the back of the property, where Richard and James were completing work on a greenhouse, a project designed to expand Emma's horticultural therapy program. Richard had settled into a part-time role at the local clinic, allowing him to be present in his daughter's life while respecting the new boundaries Margaret had established in their relationship. They weren't a conventional family by any means. There were still difficult days when Emma's developmental challenges required patience and understanding. There were moments when the weight of 50 years of separation pressed heavily on all of them. But there was also joy, forgiveness, and a sense of completion that none of them had realized they were missing. "Mail's here," James called, walking up the garden path with a stack of envelopes, including something official looking for Emma. Emma carefully wiped her hands on her gardening apron before accepting the envelope. She'd made remarkable progress with reading over the past year, but still preferred help with important documents. "What does it say?" she asked, handing it to Margaret. Margaret scanned the letter, her eyes widening. "It's from the Down Syndrome Association. They want you to be a keynote speaker at their annual conference. They've seen articles about your art and gardening program." Emma's face lit up. "Me? Speak to people?" "About your experiences," Margaret confirmed. "About transitioning from institutional to family living after 50 years. They think your story could help change perspectives. Will you help me?" Emma asked, uncertainty mixing with pride. "We all will," Catherine assured her, as James and Richard joined them on the patio. "But you'll be the one speaking. You're the expert on your own life." Little Emma Rose toddled over to her aunt, arms raised in the universal request to be picked up. Emma complied with practiced ease, settling the child on her hip. "I tell about before and now," Emma said thoughtfully. "About waiting and finding family again. And about your art," James added. "Don't forget your gallery opening next month." Emma smiled, bouncing Emma Rose gently. Never thought I'd be artist, or aunt, or speaker. There are a lot of things none of us thought would happen, Margaret said, reaching out to take her twin's free hand. But here we are. That evening, after Emma Rose had been put to bed and the extended family had dispersed to their respective quarters, Margaret found Emma sitting in the living room, carefully adding a new photograph to the family album they'd been compiling. The image showed 4 generations of Sullivan women, a recently discovered photo of their grandmother. Their mother as a young woman, Margaret and Emma at 58, and baby Emma Rose. Emma had arranged them in a collage, connecting the faces with delicately painted golden threads. Family tree, Emma explained, pointing to the threads. All connected even when apart. Margaret sat beside her twin, studying the artistic representation of their fragmented yet enduring connection. You always knew we'd find each other again, didn't you? Emma nodded. Felt you here, she said, touching her chest. Always. Even when forgot your face, remembered your heart. I wish I'd had that certainty, Margaret admitted. I lost so many years not even knowing what was missing. Not lost, Emma corrected gently. Just waiting, like seeds under snow. Still growing, just can't see. Margaret leaned against her sister's shoulder, marveling at the simple wisdom that so often emerged from Emma's unique perspective. Outside, the wind stirred fallen leaves across the garden where new plantings promised future blooms, a tangible metaphor for their late-blooming family. Finding renewal in what had seemed like an ending. What do you think Mom and Dad would say if they could see us now? Margaret asked. Emma considered this thoughtfully. Daddy would say I kept her safe. Mommy would say I always left the light on. The light in the East Wing, Margaret realized. It was always on all those years. For finding way home, Emma nodded. Now we keep light on for Emma Rose. Show her way forward.